to Wine and Dine with Haley. We are in my kitchen and I am Haley. Today we're going to be going on a wining and dining adventure where I will be making something that I have never made before and you guys will be learning about some fantastic wine. So let's pour ourselves a glass and get started. Today we're going to be drinking some Yealands Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, delicious, literally one of my favorites. Probably every time I say like, oh, it's in my top 10 wines, whatever, then something bumps it, but this has always been in my top 10. So I'm super excited to do this as my first wine with you guys. We're gonna pour up a glass because I need something while I'm cooking, obviously. Now that I have a glass of wine, I'm gonna set this aside. We do need to save some for the end to see if it pairs with what we are preparing. But let me tell you about what we're gonna be cooking today and then we'll get into the wine. Also, I will link the recipe for what we're making today in the description because this is not a tutorial. So if you want full details on that, you can find it below. Today we're going to be doing Vietnamese turmeric fish with dill and noodles. I've never made any Vietnamese dishes, but they pair very well with this wine, which we will talk about later. So without further ado, cheers. Let's get into it. Oh, God, that's good. That's really good. I want that closer to me. We'll keep that here instead of over there. I'm going to need access to it. This is not a cooking tutorial, but I am gonna just fill you in slightly on what I'm doing. The first thing that we're gonna do is slice up our fish. I went to the Asian market and they wanted monkfish for this recipe. I couldn't find any, so I ended up getting cobia fish, but it is a white fish, which is what we needed. And I looked and it was from Vietnam and this is exactly a pound, which is what we needed. So we're gonna substitute this and hope that it works. I'm not gonna lie, this smells like, oh God, it smells like a dog food store. Did this go bad? I don't think I trust this fish. Ooh, it smells bad. I can't even talk about the wine right now because I'm so concerned about this fish. I mean, it wanted a tough white fish. That's what we have. This is tough. It feels like jerky almost. What the hell did I buy? Oh, watch me get food poisoning tonight. Happy first episode of Wine and Dine. Why does this smell like dog food? Oh, everything is telling me not to eat this. Like all my instincts are being like, don't eat that. Don't you dare eat that. Hi, Daisy. You think it smells good. I think it smells like it's gonna kill us. Oh God. I don't think we can eat this. We did not even get one ingredient into our recipe and I had to go to the store. So we went and we got a different white fish from the local grocery store. We're gonna be working with some cod and then we're gonna start talking about some wine. I mean, it smells fishy, but not like that other fish. That other fish was bad. This wine ranges from like 12.5 to 13% alcohol, depending on the vintage that you get, because the alcohol content can change from vintage to vintage and very often does change from vintage to vintage. This wine is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. Sorry, I'm trying to look up, but I also don't want to look up because I don't want to cut my fingers off. So I hope you understand. The interesting thing when it comes to New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, and actually just Sauvignon Blanc in general, is that there's kind of like a cult following within the wine world. And if you like Sauvignon Blanc, chances are you either love New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc or you hate New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. California, you can take it, you can leave it. When it comes to New Zealand, it's a love or hate relationship for most people, not for everyone. But let's talk about why that is, okay? So what differentiates New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc from the rest of the world? And oh my gosh, do I love it. On the cult side of the following, I'm a New Zealand girl. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is known for its kind of aromatics, right? It has a lot of green vegetables, green bell pepper, excuse my dogs, green tea, green bell pepper, green melons, green whatever it might be. It's green, 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 green. When I drink a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, what it reminds me of is right here on my cutting board, chopping up fresh green bell pepper. And the smell that has is the same taste as a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Combined with a couple other things, grapefruit is a huge one. The smell and taste of grapefruit is really big in New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. And one of the most fun ones, which I think is the thing that gets people where they're like, nope, I am not on board. Cat pee and cat litter. What? Who said that? I did. Yeah, New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, they taste and smell like cat pee and cat litter, which seems like something like you wouldn't want to put in your mouth, but when you like smell and taste it in a wine, it's amazing. So, California Sauv Blancs, much more approachable probably for those of us that are not as adventurous. They're gonna have really strong tropical fruits, which New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs get tropical fruits too, but compared to New Zealand, just much more approachable. That's the best word I can think of for it. Other than flavor, let's talk, we talked flavor, we talked aroma, right? We're gonna get green bell pepper, we're gonna get grapefruit, we're gonna get a little bit of cat pee and cat litter, which sounds weird to say, which this one doesn't have a lot. There's some New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs that get real strong in that category. This one's subtle, but what that comes from is the minerality in the soil. So when you're smelling that, you're actually smelling the grapes as they have grown, have absorbed this minerality, and us as humans not living out in New Zealand where grapes are growing, we're like, oh yeah, that smells like a litter box. So bring me the litter box. Hard as a rock. Literally need a rock to muddle it down. Oh no. How much do I need of this? Holy cow. Why did I pick such a difficult recipe for the first one? This was supposed to be about the wine, but I can't focus on anything other than this insane recipe. As I pack this up, I'm gonna have another sip of wine. You'll see that with any Sauvignon Blanc, really, you're gonna have a really pale, light yellow straw color. Really pale. Most don't see any oak aging, very, very little, if ever. And it's just the grape expressing itself without any sort of distortion of color. So light white wine. So let's talk a little bit about New Zealand. New Zealand is the 14th largest, why can't I make this press work? the 14th largest wine producing country in the world. But that being said, they still make less than 1% of the world's total wine. Locals in New Zealand drink on average about 4 gallons of wine a year, which, if I do say so myself, coming from the Midwest, doesn't seem like that much wine. But for the world, maybe it is. For us here in the Midwestern area, we would show them up real quick. New Zealand's vineyards are the most southern vineyards in the entire world. If you look at where a map is and you look at New Zealand, it's like way southeast of Australia, kind of off on its own, 2 big islands with a bunch of small islands surrounding it. And you can't get much further south and still successfully grow grapes. But because they are so far south, they have a cool climate, which for Sauvignon Blanc works really well. There are more than 25 different grapes grown in New Zealand, but of those 25, the most popular is Sauvignon Blanc by far. It takes up like 3/4 of their growing. And then the next most renowned grape would be the Pinot Noir grape. But they have anything from Pinot Gris to Albarino, Pinot Noir. They even make some rosés where they're mixing the Sauvignon Blanc with a little Pinot Noir. So they have a lot going on. Obviously, 25 grapes, a lot more than what I just said. So there was a Sauvignon Blanc back in the 1980s called Cloudy Bay. This was a Sauvignon Blanc that basically put New Zealand on the map. Like prior to this, New Zealand was trying to make some crappy wine, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. But this was the first Sauvignon Blanc or wine that people were like, oh, this is really good. So New Zealand is kind of new to the wine game, because when we think about old world wines in Europe and stuff, we're looking at, wines that are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands sometimes of years of history. And then we look at New Zealand and we're like, well, it was pretty much garbage till the mid 1980s. Sorry, not sorry. So a little bit of history. In 1839 was the first time that somebody made wine from vines that were planted in New Zealand. In the 1800s, no wine could be sold to consumers like you or I. The only wine that could be sold was to hotels, and it was for like banquet events only. In fact, wine was not permitted to be sold to the public until after World War II. So like really recently, like when was that? 1960s, 1950s? Even after World War II, 10 p.m. was the curfew. After 10, you get no wine. Sad times back then, sad times. So after World War II was the first time that wine was allowed to be sold to customers. So these wine shops or wineries would sell to customers, and even then, restaurants couldn't even sell. It wasn't until the 1960s that restaurants were able to sell to customers, and when they could, it was a 10 p.m. curfew. So if you're out wining and dining yourself, better wrap up by 10. So we talked about the crappy wine that was being produced. I've been told that if I open up the shrimp paste that it's gonna really stink, but I cannot imagine it stinking more than that fish that I had earlier that I had to go replace. I only need a half a teaspoon of this, and I'm literally afraid to open it. Oh, there's a seal. Okay, well, while I take the seal off, we talked about New Zealand having like not that great a wine in the beginning, and what happened was phylloxera, which is a disease that all the old world vines, all the vines from Europe were not immune to. And it basically desecrated them, or decimated. Desecrated or decimated? Either way, the vines died, and people back then did not know what to do about it. So in response, they used a bunch of hybrid grapes, and they made really, really crappy sherry and really crappy brandy. So they still were making wine, they were growing grapes, but they were like, yeah, well, we have to fortify this and do something with it because it's not drinkable on its own. And that was wine for a long time in New Zealand until, honestly, you get to mid-century, like 1950s and 60s, and some people are making wine, they can finally sell it. But it wasn't until the 1980s that New Zealand was like, oh, we can make good wine. And here they are being my favorite at this point. So they got it. It just took a little while. New Zealand's wine industry has massively grown. Like we've talked about, they're young. They're really young. It wasn't until the 1980s that they were even respected. I'm really afraid to open this. So in 1994, New Zealand only had 30 wineries. 30 in the whole country. Guess how many they have as of 2023? 2,078. That's some big growth. I'm afraid to take this lid off. Oh, it's not as pungent as they said. People making me freak out for no reason. What do I need of this? Half a teaspoon. Let's take a little bit out. Scoop a little. So the big winery boom really didn't happen till honestly, 2010s, early 2010s. That's a half a teaspoon. That's good. I'm going to transfer this mixture up, mix it around. And while I do that, I want to talk to you a little bit more about New Zealand's climate. So they are one of the coolest climates that is able to grow grapes. They are a maritime climate, and actually there is no point in New Zealand, or no vineyard at least, that's more than 80 miles away from the ocean. So when you look at New Zealand, there are two big islands, two main islands, and if you go to the midway point on those, neither one of them reaches more than 80 miles. So all of the grapes are seeing a lot of diurnal shifts, a lot of the cool weather coming in from the ocean. That's going to help prolong the growing season. So when you're closer to the ocean and you get those diurnal shifts and that cool climate, you can get a really long growing season. And in New Zealand, they are on the southern hemisphere, so they're opposite of us, and their harvest is when our planting is, and our planting is when their harvest is. So they harvest their grapes anywhere from March till May, but because there's that really long growing season from that nice cool climate, those grapes are able to fully mature. And in any time in that kind of 2-month time frame, the winemakers will go out and decide when are the grapes at their peak, when are they ready to be picked. One thing that comes along with having a cool climate and a long growing season is, well, I need more than that. Great acidity. So you will find in New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs that the acidity is always really high. And one of the ways that you can tell that acidity is high in a wine, because you're talking about acid, you're like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? It tastes crisp? I don't know. The way you can find if a wine has acid is by this. Take a sip. Swish it around, swallow, and then feel what happens under your tongue. Feel what happens under your tongue after you swallow. If a wine has good acidity, what's going to happen after you swallow is you're just going to salivate and salivate and salivate, and you're going to have a mouthful of spit. And that's what we're looking for in a nice high acid white wine. Love it. So one of the things with high acid white wines that we'll get into is that they pair really, really well with fish and seafood, which is what we're preparing now. I'm gonna pop this in the fridge to marinate and I will be back. The next thing I'm gonna do is cut up these scallions, which I haven't been, hi Doozy. I got a helper. Oh, I got 2 helpers now. But you can't have scallions because they're onions. So the next thing that I'm gonna be doing, other than drinking this wine, is cutting up these scallions. The recipe says 2 inches thick. That's what we're gonna do. One of the largest challenges when it comes to growing grapes in New Zealand is the fact that they have a very rainy climate. But that was a challenge up until also mid-1980s when they started producing amazing wines, because what correlated with that? We got some viticulturists that decided that they were going to start trellising grapes, right? Picking them up, hanging them, draping them, getting them out of that bog-soaked rain. Oops. Because of that, we have some really great high acid, not waterlogged grapes that we can drink out of New Zealand now. Not only are the vineyards in New Zealand planted on the foothills of mountains, so you're able to get really, really great ocean breezes and all of that. But because they are on the foothills of some mountain ranges, they also have really vast soil types. So you're going to range anywhere from like volcanic to river basin soils. And you're going to have a lot of different nutrients in those different soils. We're going to move on to the sauce that I need to put together. For anyone that doesn't know, I didn't know this for so long. If you're gonna smush a lime or a lemon, you want to put it in like face side or open side down and smush it that way. I thought that you should match the concave of the device, but that is definitely not right. Oof, smells so good. I love limes. Key lime pie is my favorite pie. I love me some lime. It's probably why I like some Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, is because it's zesty like lime juice is. That can literally be one of the tasting notes in some of these New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs is lime. So this is gonna pair perfectly. So this recipe had some sort of noodle that I can't pronounce, vermicelli. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. It wouldn't be pronounced like that because it's not Italian. I did not get those noodles because when I found them in the market, they were like super, super, super thin and so broken up that they were all little tiny 1/2-inch pieces. And when I looked at the photo of this, it looked like long tubular noodles. So I got these rice noodles instead. The recipe is telling me to cook them according to what it says. And it says nothing. So I'm gonna boil some water. I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about this wine, and we're just gonna throw the noodles in the water. So while our water heats up for our noodles, let's talk about this wine. Let's talk a little bit about New Zealand wine laws, because every single country, and not even just country, every single region has different wine laws. 85% of the grapes listed on the label, so this lists Sauvignon Blanc. That means that 85% of the grapes must be Sauvignon Blanc. That seems like a not strict thing, but it actually is pretty strict. When you go to California, you only have to have 75% to call it what it is. So if you have a California Cabernet, 25% of the grapes, 1/4 of that bottle can be something completely different than Cabernet. So 85% is pretty strict in my opinion. On top of that, to list a region, so here we see Marlborough. which is such a hard word for me to say, and I'm not saying it right. Marlborough, whatever. To list a specific growing region, 85% of the grapes must also come from that region. And then additionally, which this doesn't happen much with New Zealand wines, but if you're gonna list more than one varietal on the label, you have to do it in order of percentage. So if you have a Cab Merlot, Cab must be the predominant grape in that bottle, Merlot comes after. Or a Merlot Cab would be Merlot first and then Cab. That doesn't generally happen with New Zealand wines because actually most of them tend to be true to the grape varietal and 100%, which this one is as well, 100% Sauvignon Blanc. So let's talk a little bit about Marlboro, the word that I can't say. Even though when I was in my young 20s, I smoked cigarettes and I feel like everyone said that word and I all of a sudden have blanked out how to say it. But let's go to Marlboro. Let's talk a little bit about their past. So up until 1973, we have the North Island and we have the South Island of New Zealand, okay? North Island, a little bit warmer. We had some wineries out there. Not many, but we had a few. South Island didn't have a single winery planted on it until 1973. And that's just basically because it was so much cooler. Like the climate wasn't meant to grow grapes. But because it has such a cool climate, it was home to what is now, in my opinion, best Sauvignon Blancs in the world, because Sauvignon Blanc loves a cool climate, and New Zealand had the right sun, the right cooling with the ocean breezes and they had all in one. And they just need to work their way a little bit down south, which they did in 1973. And at the time, the winery that was really big down there was called Montana Wines. So in 2005, Montana Wines, which was the biggest wine conglomerate, I'll call it a conglomerate because that's what I feel like it was, down on the southern island, the northern part of the southern island of New Zealand, was bought out by Brancott, which is owned by Pernod Ricard. And Pernod Ricard sells many things that all of you like, such as Jameson and Malibu and Jefferson's and Rabbit Hole and Screwball. Even though Montana Wines was bought out by Pernod Ricard, which nothing against that. I'm all here, like, take your money and run. But Yealands, to this day, is the largest privately family-owned winery in Marlborough, which we'll talk a little bit more about that. Even though no vines were planted until 1973 on that South Island of New Zealand, over 3/4 of the wine coming out from that island, well, from New Zealand in general, both islands combined, 3/4 of it is coming from Marlborough. They have taken over and claimed their stake. So let's talk specifically about Yealands. This winery was founded on 8/8/8, which is August 8th of 2008. So they're about 15 years old. Sounds like a relatively young winery, but when you look at New Zealand's wine culture as a whole, they're right during the boom. They got in when it was hot and heavy, and it's still continuing to grow, but they got in at the time that they needed to. My dog is once again, Wapatuppa. She is disrupting. So, Navy, can you lay down? And then Mommy's gonna talk about where the winery is located? Yeah, I would love that, and thank you so much. So the winery butts up against this cliff on the northeast side of the South Island. It's Clifford Bay, and the vines go basically to the ocean. So they're getting all those diurnal shifts, which create great high acidic wines, which is what we see in the Sauvignon Blanc. So Yealands Vineyard is called Sea View Vineyard, and it's probably because they're literally butt up against the sea. Sea View Vineyard is the largest privately owned vineyard in literally all of New Zealand, so good for them. The founder of the winery is Peter Yealand, hence Yealands. He started the winery in 2008. He retired in 2018, and Natalie Christensen has now taken over. She's head winemaker, and I say all the props to you, Natalie, because we need more female winemakers in this world, and just more females in general doing boss-ass bitch things. Okay, I just put the noodles in. You can probably hear them boiling behind me, but whilst they boil, I want to talk a little bit about the winemaking process for this wine / New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs in general. Most New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs don't see any oak aging, and that's because this kind of crisp green vegetal and also fruit, just floral and fruity and vegetal aromas, you don't want to cover up with heavy oak. So most New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, when I say most, I mean like 99%, are not seeing any oak. They're all in stainless steel. If they are seeing any oak, it's going to be like old oak barrels that are neutral, and they're just putting them in there for a little bit to round it out, to maybe take down that crispness and acidity just a little bit, but for the most part, no oak. The fruit is destemmed, it's gently pressed down, it's put into those stainless steel tanks, it's fermented, and then it's taken out of those tanks and sent to bottling, and we have a fun, fresh, crisp, high acid white wine that people like me love to drink. I am getting ahead of myself because I'm realizing I have lots of things left in this recipe, including literally having to roast these peanuts. And I have talked about a lot of what I want to talk about. So I'm going to continue on this recipe, and we're going to check back in together after I've drank more of this wine. Okay, I've progressed a little bit since we last met, which for you is like a second, and for me was like a half an hour. We have these lovely noodle dishes: rice noodles, dill, scallions, fresh roasted peanuts, turmeric and garlic infused fish. Super delicious looking. And then we have this little dressing that I'm going to put over the top of both of these. Now, why does this pair with this wine? When it comes to New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, white fish pairs great with a high acidity. And then dill and turmeric also complement New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs really well. So any sort of fish or dilly, or you can even do some sort of salad, just like something light and crisp, some sort of feta type of salad, really would complement a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc very well. But before we wrap up and try this, I just want to tell you a couple more things about this winery. They are super into sustainability. So they are like a nature positive, carbon positive situation. They have tons of solar panels that help power their winery. They have 3 different windmills. They have sheep out on the vineyards that help, so they don't have to use tractors and things to mow in between the vineyards. They plant wildflowers to help attract positive insects and keep away pests. It's just one thing after another. I mean, they are, when you go look at their sustainability portion of their website, it is the largest portion of their website. They talk more about sustainability than they do about their wines. Super delicious wine. Love drinking it, knowing that they are trying to help the world rather than a lot of businesses that hinder the world. They are doing everything they can to give back, and if you have never had a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, please go out and try one. Compare it to a California one. They're very different. But before we go, let me put our dressing on top of this little noodle concoction and see what we have. Honestly, my husband came home and he was like, it smells really fishy. And I was like, yeah, it does. Could be good. Could be bad. We don't know. I'm just gonna disperse this little concoction evenly. Gotta keep a bottle or a glass of Sauvy B for him too. I want to show it to you all mixed up. Okay, let's give it a go. A super light fish with the acidity should go well. It's really dilly. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I don't even feel like I'm in Fargo right now. I feel like I'm on a vacation. Okay, I gotta go give this to my husband because I need him to experience this before it's cold and dry, because I think we did a good thing. Okay, thanks for joining. Next time, we'll have a different wine, we'll have a different food. We're gonna learn all about them, and I will see you then.